around gender injustice. We will begin with opening remarks by two globally renowned champions of gender equality. Next, we will hold a lively dialogue among pioneering women's rights organizations, all members of the Legal Empowerment Network. Our featured speakers engaged in a participatory research project on tackling violence against women during the pandemic, whose preliminary findings we will explore together. We will end with closing remarks from two leading voices on the fight for gender justice, equality, and inclusion. To provide us with our opening remarks, it is my honor to introduce Ms. Mary Robinson, the first woman president of Ireland, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She is a passionate, forceful advocate for gender equality, women's participation in peace building, human dignity, and climate justice. Thank you so much for joining us, Mary. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Abigail, and greetings to all of you. I'm delighted to be joining this event today, and I'm surrounded in this virtual space by such inspiring feminists and human rights champions. As we focus on the lived experience of women and girls around the world, I'm reminded that although this conversation is virtual, the issues that we're talking about are very, very real. I thank the organizers of today's event and all those who've supported the Commission on the Status of Women over the years for making this vital discussion on access to justice possible. I think all of us participating know how important it is to talk about access to justice, particularly for women and girls. A key part of the 2030 agenda is the need to address the global justice gap, the 5.1
She just muted, hold on. Hold on, Mary. Hold on one second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, great.
Okay.
The
so
5.1.
Start with the key part of the 2030 agenda. I'll go back to that, will I?
Yes, please.
Yes. A key part of the 2030 agenda is the need to address the global justice gap, the 5.1 billion people who have no effective access to justice. For too many, a gulf exists between the promise of justice and the realities, their realities on the ground. Crises are never gender neutral, and COVID-19 is no exception. Violence against women has increased. Women are losing their livelihoods faster than men. Millions of women carry a disproportionate responsibility for caregiving. The United Nations uses the phrase, build back better, but frankly, I don't believe that we should go back at all. Now is the time for us to build forward. We need to build forward for justice, for equality, and for sustainability. Justice systems should be refocused on the expressed needs of women, on ending violence against women and girls, on family issues, including divorce and inheritance, and on those parts of the legal system that can prevent women from earning a decent living. Justice is an essential service, but while some countries have taken steps to ensure virtual access to courts and continued protection through extension of judicial orders, others have failed to meet the growing needs of women. And I think that's borne out in your research. I was very interested to see that a lot of the official systems seem to break down just because of COVID, the official access to justice. In these turbulent times, I've been impressed by grassroots organizations stepping up to support the most marginalized. For example, during a pandemic lockdown in Guatemala, the Women's Justice Initiative used radio broadcasts to amplify essential information on reporting violence and accessing justice. By utilizing radio technology with widespread coverage, they reached 100,000 indigenous peoples across the country. In India, the My Choices Foundation, under the banner Operation Peacemaker, deployed community paralegals who staffed shelters, helped survivors, and mobilized police support. COVID-19 has changed the way grassroots justice organizations operate. They could have given up in the face of such challenges, but they have not. They have adapted. Shortly, we will hear from our panel about the critical work being done to support women who experience violence during COVID-19. Their organizations have collaborated on a participatory research project where, together, they are striving to provide guidance on how legal empowerment can build people-centered institutions focused on ending violence against women and girls. Grassroots organizations are often the first and only responders to injustice. They're trusted by local populations and are able to reach communities where governments can't. This is why the elders, along with other non-funding partners, launched the COVID-19 Grassroots Justice Fund. During this pandemic, the fund provides a lifeline to grassroots organizations in the form of flexible, rapid response grants. As of today, over 400,000 has already been distributed to 30 organizations around the world. However, it's also vital that governments prioritize justice in their COVID-19 recovery plans. The pandemic has laid bare manifold failures that require long-term investment and sustainable solutions. Governments must ensure that addressing the intersecting issues faced by women and girls are at the center of their recovery planning. Last year, we marked the 25th anniversary of the landmark Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We've made some progress on the promises made, but nowhere near enough. The Generation Equality Forum will be launched, as you know, in Mexico at the end of this month, culminating in Paris at the end of June. We have an opportunity to secure a set of concrete, ambitious, and transformative commitments to achieve immediate and irreversible progress towards gender equality. For too long, access to justice has been the preserve of the privileged few. Our generation equality must have access to justice at its very heart. Justice is in itself a right, but it is also an enabler of all other rights. Thank you very much. And together we must place women and girls and justice for women and girls at the core of our COVID-19 response and beyond. So I look forward to your panel.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your inspiring and informative observations. We will now hear from Dr. Nadine Gazman, President of the National Institute of Women in Mexico. She spent the last 3 decades working to advance women's rights, especially for women and girls in the most vulnerable conditions at local, national, international levels. Nadine, please go ahead. Please unmute yourself. Let's see.
I was being bilingual. Good morning, buen día, buenos días a todas y a todos. Realmente me congratulo también de que estemos celebrando este panel y agradezco la invitación, pues estoy convencida que el trabajo de las organizaciones de mujeres ha sido y sigue siendo crucial para los avances de la agenda de las mujeres y el ejercicio de nuestros derechos humanos, así como en el mejoramiento de las condiciones de vida de las mujeres y niñas de todo el mundo. Es cierto que estos avances no han sido parejos y que esta reunión de la Comisión de la Condición de las Mujeres constituye una oportunidad para refrendar los compromisos de los
unprecedented opportunity to take advantage of the situation and work in collaborative associations and partnerships with civil society organizations and recognize their essential contributions in the path that we share to gain real equal rights amongst men and women in all regions, in all cities. In partnership is a call that comes from the Conference of Population and Development carried out in El Cairo in 1994, when 293 countries agreed to a development agenda based upon respect of women's rights and in the needs to turn the approach with which sexual and reproductive health services were presented. Feminist civil societies organizations were the protagonists of this change that debated their change program and understood that without civil society organizations, it would have been very difficult, maybe impossible, to implement agreed purposes. So there is a call to establish these associations in collaboration in which government institutions would respect the experience and knowledge accumulated by organizations and partner in equal opportunities and make progress in gender equality initiatives today. In the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to go back to El Cairo's commitments and try to implement these principles to overcome this unimaginable situation that, as Mary has mentioned before, that has really made girls and women's situation worse. We in Mexico, we feel that at the government, we need to strengthen our cooperation with women organizations that have shown interest. And this is what we're currently working on. I welcome this global initiative that includes input from women's organizations from Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, in response to women's situation in the face of the pandemic. The objective that the 19 organizations that are participating in this network project of empowerment with TEMIS, the Brazilian organization that I know and admire deeply, either from Uganda, from Sub-Saharan Africa, YESEF from Macedonia. They are the ones that can give us the institutional response to the needs women have, especially within the framework of justice access, gender-based violence, as well as the role of defenders to fill gaps, including better provision of services, reduce violence, and accountability. A new contribution of this research undoubtedly was to analyze innovative practices, community practices, and collaborative practices that can be implemented during recovery efforts during the pandemic, beyond the pandemic, to make progress in access to justice for girls and women. Most activities implemented by these organizations in response to the crisis of violence against women generated by the pandemic or worsened by the pandemic in the countries analyzed are similar to what Mexican women's organizations have undertaken. It is important to clarify that Mexico, within this framework, in women's services for women's victim of violence and refugee women have been declared essential services, and this provision has not been interrupted during the pandemic. Amongst the activities that have been developed in Mexico that are similar to the ones reported by the research, we have the provision of online support services, strategies so that victims can come to terms with the situation without being at risk, information and literacy campaigns with community and grassroots radios for women that have no access to technology, support toll-free telephone numbers, building on the support provided in response centers, response teams in vulnerable communities, legal and psychological support for women victims of violence, and all the initiatives that have to do with the strengthening of the services, with funding appropriate, and cooperation with government institutions at local level to leverage efforts. Another important opportunity that we will have from government to strengthen alliances and collaboration at interinstitutional level with civil society organizations is the Equality Forum that will take place in Mexico between the 29th and 30th of March. This forum, organized by the government of France and Mexico jointly, this Women's Forum is the first stage of a process that started in France. It will take place in June and July and will end in the UN's General Assembly in September, 26 years after the Fourth World Meeting on Beijing, Women's Meeting in Beijing. This forum has the objective of positioning the feminist agenda and taking steps to accelerate gender equality through action coalitions and constitute a group of friend countries that support gender equality. I invite you all to register, participate. Tomorrow, registrations will close, and we hope you all will participate and register in the Generation Equality Forum. We believe it will be a great moment to debate, amongst other things, everything that has to do with women's access to these policies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nadine. We'll take your words to heart, and there's lots to be joining in the next few days. I would like now to introduce Denise Dora, co-founder and board member of TEMIS, Gender, Justice, and Human Rights, as well as Jade Alves, project advisor and popular legal promoter at TEMIS. As an A member within the Legal Empowerment Network, TEMIS leads network members in organizing collective action and learning around gender justice, and also spearheads the participatory research project involving 19 grassroots justice groups from around the world, which we highlight today. Denise and Jade, go ahead.
Hello, morning to all of you from Brazil. It's a great pleasure to see you here, Nadine. Nadine was the UN Women representative in Brazil for many years. It's a very important person for us. It's also a great pleasure to have all of you here. And today I'm Denise Dora. I'm a co-founder together with Marcia Soares of TEMIS, feminist organization in the south of Brazil, working with legal empowerment since 1993. We are today presenting research that was done in the last 5 months about gender justice during the COVID-19 crisis. As you see, there are a group of people and organizations who have participated in this work, and who was led by NAMAT, the Global Legal Empowerment Network, and also by TEMIS. We had the pleasure to work together with 19 participant organizations in four continents, in Eastern Europe, Latin America, South and Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, with the co-lead of ESI, the Association for Emancipation, Solidarity and Equality of Women in Macedonia, and FIDA Uganda in Africa. And today we will see a little bit about this work. We did a summary of it as first words, but in fact, what we will listen today is from each of the heads of these organizations about their own work. Just giving us some background on context and challenge. In 2020, the pandemic has reached all the countries in the world and demanded relevant governmental responses. The research shows, however, that there are differences within countries, with some suffering much more severe consequences depending on local political context and also local political leaders. In this scenario, gender-based violence was a turning point for the life of millions of women, billions of them, in fact. And what we see is, although the context can be a little different, the impact over women's lives are the same, particularly facing situations of gender violence. In all countries, state institutions were not working properly. Most of the court hearings were delayed, postponed, or canceled. Law enforcement agencies like special police stations were reduced or closed, leaving the victims without mechanisms for the resolution of situations of violence and other legal issues like children custody or legal abortion. Next, please. In this context and with this challenge, what we have seen in this research is that justice institutions, in all cases, started to work only on emergency protection orders in the cases of gender-based violence. In most of the countries, at the very beginning of the COVID, justice services were closed and without any regular practice of using technologies that would facilitate access to justice. Very slowly, justice service started to establish online hearings and other procedures without a proper policy for protection of women. What we've seen and what these participants organizations tell is that the justice sector was not prepared to deal with the COVID, and it was their movement to reorganize themselves were really slow. And in this scenario, it was women's rights and civil society organizations who provided support for women, online hotlines, training, support, economic support, digital support. So it was the civil society in these countries that organized themselves to answer this. Specifically on access to justice for women suffering violence, we've seen some legal strategies. We will only highlight some points because we will learn and listen from the heads of the organizations itself. For example, organizations, some people said we reinvented ourselves to do online trainings for women community leaders working on gender-based violence case, but not only. Online regular communications amongst organizations, women and justice services, community TV and radio to broadcast awareness campaigns on gender-based violence using community radios at rural and urban areas. We've also seen several cases of mediation for violence cases in small urban and rural communities, trying to find solutions for aggressors, possession of children and adolescents, food benefits, and other challenges. And we've seen also some more strong experience of cooperation agreements with special courts on gender-based violence for monitoring women with protective measures. So we've seen these organizations reinventing themselves to find solutions and deliver some responses. So now we are going to listen and learn from them, and particularly on this question, which is exactly what are the main experiences that these organizations are facing. So we would like to listen, learn how you are using grassroots justice approach to address gender-based violence and why legal empowerment is your main strategy. In particular, how have you and your organization adapted to continue support women during the pandemic? And we would start today listening to Jasminka Frischlich, Executive Director for the Association of Emancipation, Solidarity and Equality of Women in North Macedonia. Please, Jasminka, the stage is yours.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because I'm assuming that the women and activists from all over the world are following this panel because it's very interesting. My name is Denis has said Jasminka, and I'm coming from the North Macedonia, from a civil society organization that has a long history of working on gender-based violence, but also on allowing and enabling access to justice to women. Well, it's almost 25 years since we as an organization have started to begin our work on assessing the prevalence and practically started to pave the way of legally defining this phenomenon in the country. And it took us 8 years of a struggle and continuous and, of course, joint work with different professional structures in order to have an appropriate legal basis for resolution of this problem. But unfortunately, 70 years after the adoption of those laws, we cannot really say that we have put them into the practice. So practically, that is clearly showing that the access to justice for women who have suffered gender-based violence is still a problem, let's say. And the women practically who are turning for support and seek support from ESA in resolution of their problem related with the violence are unanimous that they are facing different types of barriers when accessing and resolving their legal problems. Practically, the institutional response is very weak, and therefore it cannot provide efficient and appropriate protection for women that have suffered violence. In addition, in order to resolve their problems related to violence, women need to lead minimum 2 to maximum 9 court procedures. We are speaking here about the court protection. And you can imagine that the number of these court procedures are immediately building up the amount of the court-related costs which needed to be invested by the women in front in order to resolve their problems and have those procedures initiated and, of course, ended. So, for example, one of the most common, let's say, legal or the court procedures that women are leading in resolving their violence problem is the divorce case. And let's say for these procedures, women are usually spending from minimum 70% of their average salary to up or to maximum of 3 monthly salaries, which is immediately giving you a perspective of what are the barriers that women are facing in resolution of their problems. But this is not all. Women usually, when they intend and when they decide to resolve their problems legally through the formal systems, usually they are accounting only for the initial costs for initiating those court procedures. But unfortunately, there are many hidden costs which came along through the different types of procedures, and therefore this is one of the barriers where women usually are quitting and are not resolving the problems which have arise from the violence actually. Well, the situation, this is practically the situation, very brief for the average, let's say, Macedonian women that have suffered gender-based violence. But when we are speaking about marginalized and poor communities which are isolated, and especially about the Roma women, the situation is much more worse, because the level or the rate of reporting the violence among these women is quite lower than the average Macedonian women. And usually the problems that they are facing are arising from their poorness, from their social exclusion, from the lack of services that are not available in the communities where do they live. And practically one data is very clearly showing that the formal justice system for the Roma women, especially in this country, but all over the Europe, I'm assuming it's very low, or only 2% are seeking the resolution of their problems through the formal system, which is clearly stating that the judicial system is practically inaccessible for them. In order for us to respond to these problems to the women, we undertake different types of legal strategies, of legal empowerment strategies. Of course, one of them is to monitor the implementation of the laws and practically to identify the barriers and trying continuously to improve the legislation and create much more favorable legal basis for resolution of the problems of the women. And during the emergency situation related with the COVID, we have done the same. We have practically monitored how the state is responding to this phenomenon. And we have in several occasions asked for them directly to increase the level of the protection in the country for these women, to introduce different types of approaches where the women, for instance, can ask for issuing of the civil restraining order without the presence at the court, for instance, and of course to immediately reinstate the multi-coordinated approach, which practically didn't exist during at the very beginning and afterwards during the COVID crisis. We as organization are also providing legal assistance and of course a court representation for a certain number of women. But practically due to the COVID crisis, we were not able to provide those services directly. So therefore, we have to adapt actually the services that we are providing. One of the, let's say, resolutions of how we can increase our influence, or actually how we can enable the women to get to be informed about the different types of violence, was through a virtual legal platform where women can easily enter and request support, and that type of a support or that type of a question that they are imposing will be responded in a time frame of 24 hours, or immediately where possible to do so. We have also financially supported different types of women that are seeking support in a different types of needs. For example, paying their rent, food packages, and medical expenses, since we all know that this COVID crisis has financially had a financial impact and effects, or negative effects, over the women. And in Roma communities, we have a network of paralegals, which are empowering and providing services to the marginalized communities where the Roma live in Macedonia especially. And practically they have continued during the COVID crisis, they have continued to be present on the field. They have been present among their own communities, and we have helped them in order to, of course, provide the needed assistance from those who have seek their support. Especially during the COVID crisis, since we are providing assistance to these Roma paralegals and to other group and also to other paralegals which are providing services to different marginalized communities, such as the LGBT, sex workers, and people who use drugs. So practically we have to, we adopted the way of how we are continuously educating and providing knowledge to them. So we have, for that purpose, instead of organizing trainings in person, we have developed e-training modules, which were not only serving the purposes for their education, but also can serve for purposes for enlarging the number of community paralegals on different issues and for different purposes, let's say. And in conclusion, I may freely say, but also we may freely say as an organization that is working on this issue, that the COVID crisis has taught us very valuable lesson, or to be more precise, have reminded us to a very valuable conclusion, and that is that the grassroots justice initiatives, and especially paralegals, as a community resource and as a community asset, which is present among the communities where they serve, actually is really an excellent way of how we can provide an effective, timely assistance and support to women that are suffering gender-based violence, of course, and can compensate for the state inability to adapt to this situation, and till the services of the state are not reinstated or redelivered, let's say, in a way. So practically, therefore, we must consider, we as an activist, must consider the possibility when a future or the existing plans of resilience and recovery for the communities are prepared, to include this component of having grassroots justice resources like the paralegals or other ways of let's say, resources or different types of support that can be provided to communities in order not to face such a situation as we have faced in the COVID or in a prolonged, let's say, COVID situation. Thank you very much. And I'm here for answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Jadminka. It's really a fascinating experience. And I'm going to pass directly to Lynette from FIDA Uganda to tell us a bit about their work in Africa and the experience of other organizations as well. Lynette?
Thank you so much, Denise. Yes. So I'll start by saying that the initial measures adopted by the government of Uganda to curb the spread of COVID-19 were not sensitive to the vulnerabilities of the poor and marginalized. And they were also largely gender blind. During the total lockdown, there was a ban on private and public transport, on social gatherings, and there was also a curfew in place. And while certain service providers, such as healthcare workers and journalists, were categorized as essential, the majority of services that a woman facing violence at home would need were not classified as essential. And this included legal aid, courts, social workers, and even shelters. So this meant that as a legal aid service provider, FIDA Uganda was not able to receive walk-in clients, to conduct site visits, to do rescues and mediations as we normally would. We really had to rethink the way that we approach justice, and we had to be very flexible with what we had. Unfortunately, as part of our grassroots justice response, FIDA Uganda has invested heavily over the years in strengthening community justice structures and building relationships within these structures. What this looks like is training community members as paralegals, or as we call them, community legal volunteers. The people who we select for this training are ordinary community members, including youths and teachers, but also people who are part of local governance structures, such as local and cultural leaders, community development officers, and even members of the Uganda Police Force. So over the years, we have established a cohort of people in the 21 districts where we work who are aware of human rights and legal issues and are able to support the community with legal education, advice, referrals, and mediation. During the lockdown period, these community justice structures were indispensable to FIDA's grassroots justice response. Our staff were not able to travel to the communities to respond to cases, but our paralegals were already there, and they could respond and offer guidance and referral, and also flag emergencies. So we provided an online refresher training to our CLVs very early on in the lockdown, and we supported them with advice and guidance over the phone, and also some facilitation to do their work. They were truly our strongest link in handling cases during 2020. Along with our work with the paralegals or CLVs, we drew on our relationships with formal community justice structures in order to collaborate with them to overcome the new challenges to provide services to women facing gender-based violence. FIDA Uganda's relationship with the local police was of particular importance to our GBV response during the lockdown. And this collaboration looked different in each of the districts where we work, depending on the availability of resources and the nature of the relationship. In Mbali district, for example, the local police do not have their own vehicles and make use of public transport to carry out their duties. So this means that with a ban on public transport, the police also found themselves stranded. But the FIDA officers in Mbali does have a vehicle and offered this to the police so that they could do their work. And in turn, the police allowed FIDA staff to go with them when they went to the field. And they also protected them when they engaged in what could be perceived as a public gathering in working with clients and attending to cases. In another district, the FIDA team reached out to the district police commander and asked to accompany the police whenever they had an opportunity to appear on local radio. In this way, the FIDA staff could share information about the availability of our legal services and our hotline, free of charge. The FIDA staff would also place a table in the police station and use it as their office. They would attend to cases of GBV reported to the Child and Family Protection Unit. And FIDA staff would visit police posts on a regular basis in order to inquire about the status of GBV clients and offer support. Good relationships with police also helped FIDA to get permission to continue with their work and use their cars in some districts. Our collaboration with the formal community justice actors also meant that we joined district task forces where we could accompany village health teams to the village and to the field in order to identify cases and publicize our services. Ultimately, what we have learned is that the practice of working with existing community structures and strengthening and supporting these structures means that reliance can be placed on them in times of crisis. I have to echo the findings of SA and what Jasminka just shared with us, that that paralegals truly fill a very important gap that was left in this time of crisis. And even going forward, they were an essential structure to rely on, along with other community justice actors, to ensure that women who face violence receive justice. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we are going to listen to Marcia Soares. She's the co-founder and the executive director of TEMIS, one of the leading organizations in this research. And Marcia, palavra sua.
You have the floor.
Bom,
Bom dia a todas.
Good day, everyone. Good day. I would like to thank Namachi for the invitation to play this very important role. I'd like to especially thank the TEMI's special team. They are women who are compromised and committed, seriously committed to helping women in a situation of violence to ensure their well-being. I'd like to thank these women promoters. I am part of a civil society organization that since has the empowerment of women one of its main strategies for access to justice by women. The popular promoters, they are trained. They get popular feminist legal training, and then they develop the community volunteers, and they act in community areas that we call women information centers. These places will then shelter women who find themselves in a situation of violence, and they are also space for dialogue and violence prevention. With the sanitary crisis, the pandemic, all these services had to be closed. So we face the challenge of creating a new work methodology. Brazil marked 20th of March, the community transmission, as we called it, or community transmission of the virus. And so in March, social distancing rules were created by law. So the federal government decided which were the essential services that could remain open vis-a-vis this isolation orientation. And they did not include any services for women. And this brought about very serious consequences for women at large, because the services that weren't working that well before anyway had to be closed down. And so they were seeing these women remotely and very little. And so the consequences were foreseeable, like the increase in feminicide and homicide of women, the increase of violence, and the denouncements in the women's police stations will also increase, because most of crimes that involve the woman demands the presence of the victim. So women were isolated with their abusers and aggressors in their homes without being able to denounce and talk about the violence that they were suffering. Most of these crimes, in light of this, just to give you an idea, 23% of rapes were not informed or denounced, greater than 10% decrease in the crimes of threats, and a 16% drop in the body injury crime. And so the urgent protection measures, which are the main measures of protecting women that are included in our law, the main one is removing the aggressor, was reduced. So these measures could not be followed, because without the formal denunciation, they could not act on that. So in light of this scenario, within this context, we were challenged to build this methodology, and we signed a formal partnership with the judiciary services of Rio Grande do Sul, and we created a strategy of monitoring urgent protection measures and following up on these women remotely. This was not an isolated action. It was formalized through a technical cooperation term. We were able to build this monitoring model, which it includes the judiciary, the popular community paralegals, the universities, and the network of services that were still operating. So it was just one model that was able to organize this network, which was at that point completely disconnected as a network because of what was going on in the state. This model began with the creation of a work group of the popular community workers that they would get a phone number and connectivity through their regular recharging of their mobile phones. And then a flow was established by which justice was already referring to TEMIS regularly, the list of women who got urgent protection measures, protective measures. TEMIS selected the women and would then follow, would refer them to the popular prosecutor's office in that site, the place, the area where the woman, the popular legal prosecutor would then contact them by phone and started providing them orientation. They followed up on these women and referred to us the service network that we built in light of this situation and to the network, the still existing network. So this woman, if she is in a vulnerable position, TEMIS offered a basic stipend for her to be able to reestablish herself, connectivity through recharging her cell phone, reloading her cell phone, and so that she could call the military police and even the legal system, the judiciary. And so we keep this woman connected. So isolation is not only physical, the isolation that these women suffer is not only physical, but also due to their lack of connectivity. So we try to solve that. This woman, if she needs, and the promoter then assesses all this. If she needs legal assistance, we have a partnership with the university. They welcome these women and they, in a volunteer fashion, they provide legal services. If we identify the need that this woman needs psychological support, we have a partnership of a group of psychologists of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, what they call intersectional feminist clinic, women's clinic, where many psychologists of the university and students of the psychology college, they provide voluntary services. And this services was created in the pandemic. It didn't exist before. And it's a service that is consolidating itself. And we hope that it will continue afterwards. And this can be done by WhatsApp, which is the instrument that these women have, oftentimes in group or individually, and depending on the need of each woman. And the popular legal promoter, if this woman is under risk and the aggressor breaches the protection, the restraining order, then the woman will call Maria da Penha, a public civil police service that will go to this woman's house to avoid that the worst may happen. So this is a full methodology of articulating the network and in an attempt to protect this woman's life. As a result, I think it's important to say before I close, in 2020, we assessed this project and there was a very positive impact. 606 women were forwarded. Of these 606 women, 394 were referred to being treated by this. We have to screen them. Some of them left the area. Others did not want to be treated or seen. And so TEMIS makes the first contact and notes, and those who did want to follow up were then forwarded. I think that this is an experience that began a small experience in a small city, Porto Alegre, which is in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, within the pandemic. But we are implementing this in Porto Alegre in this port. And with time, we may be able to systematize this service and even replicate it throughout the country. Thank you for your attention and the opportunity.
We are going to our four panelists, Dr. Farzana from the My Choice Foundation in India. She has been also following all the process of grassroots community justice services in India. And so, Farzana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here. Good morning and good evening to all the passionate people joined us today in this important conversation. I'm Dr. Farzana, Head of Programs, My Choices Foundation. And I'm honored to be part of this initiative and presenting the work of My Choices Foundation here. I come from a country, India, which can overwhelm you with its population, diversity, and culture. But the situation of women and girls can also take you aback, especially gender-based violence. My Choices Foundation's work is empowering communities to tackle gender-based violence with a focus on domestic violence, child sexual abuse, and human trafficking of women and girls. Our effort is to give choice to them to enjoy the equality, freedom, and abuse-free life guaranteed in the Constitution and law. And we have a team of skilled trained counselors, lawyers, and at grassroots level, we have hundreds of empowered community paralegals whom we call peacemakers, who are trained to support women and girls in access to justice. So to address the GBV holistically, we have developed our intervention and prevention strategies with a focus of legal empowerment. And throughout this pandemic, those two strategies helped us reaching out to most vulnerable and marginalized. Under intervention, we have community paralegals, a case management system, counseling centers, helpline support, legal aid through our in-house lawyers. We felt the need of a safe space for women, which is really not available in our country. Majority of the time, the conditions of these shelter homes are not really good. So we came up with a shelter home of our own. And our partnership with local police also help us streamlining many things. The police, the rapport with the police helped us to get the access to the cases of domestic violence that coming into police stations. So under this partnership, police sent those cases to us in our centers for counseling. And if it can be resolved through counseling, then it is resolved at our center level. And if it needs further intervention or FIR or police, then we send back those cases to police with our reports. And that is really very helpful to the women, especially dealing with police. Awareness and sensitization is the key to prevent current and future cycle of abuse. Under our prevention strategy, our focus is to stop the cycle of abuse before it even begins. And we try to reach out every strata of society to ensure that the member of the communities are sensitized and educated on gender equality, rights, law, with a human rights approach. The prevention programs are aimed not just to sensitize people about violence, but also help them to identify the sign of abuse in their friends, family, community, and seek help. Getting justice for distressed women was already difficult due to the insensitive and this lengthy legal proceedings. And the pandemic made it worse. As we are hearing from other panelists that how everything got hard. And many times survivors are giving up hope. And as an organization, keeping their hope in the institutions is very critical. When the government is busy tackling, containing the virus, gender-based violence cases rises on alarming rate. And we have adopted several strategies not to combat gender-based violence, but also complementing government work or many a times filling the gaps left by the institutions. And here I would like to share some of the work that we did, are doing, and how effectively we're able to deal with this pandemic situation. We all know that women were trapped inside the houses with no means to approach NGO. Immediately after the announcement of lockdown, we have made over 1,000 phone calls to all the clients to check their safety with the assurance that we are working and we are there to support them. And that made a huge difference. We started online telephonic counseling and dealt many cases of domestic violence. It includes telephonic legal advices too. Over the years, we built the close relationship with the police, and we were able to get their help in some of the critical cases during the lockdown and after. We kept our shelter home open with all precautions, as it was very difficult for women to have a safe space during that lockdown and after. We have launched National Domestic Helpline quickly to provide resource and support to the women who are approaching from other states. Currently, we are based in South India. So India is huge, and across every state, the women were suffering. And this was done through the partnership of local grassroots organizations. We have expanded our work in other states too, and added more counselor and resources to support the women. We did all these training, adding this added resources through online. So online trainings were very crucial during this whole phase. We have more than 150 grassroots organizations as implementing partners for our human trafficking work. And those organizations really stood to support the women and girls who were facing difficulties. The most difficult part is the field intervention. That too, we moved online and WhatsApp groups have been created. We reached all strata of women, girls, boys, and started these programs, awareness programs on these platforms. We were part of many state and national level advocacy efforts also to put forward the recommendations to the government to address the gender-based violence in this situation. And this, we were also, with the close relationship, the police, we got the opportunity to train their police personnel and sensitize them on gender-based violence, how to handle them. And they also took us on board to provide technical and training support to their newly initiative during this lockdown, similar to our paralegal model. This is designed to reach out to the middle, and upper strata of women facing gender-based violence. So we handholded the whole process for the police. The other strategy that really worked well for us is the strategic selection of our community paralegals, whom we call peacemakers. Many of them are associated with government as a community health workers. And during this pandemic and lockdown, they were visiting, they were able to reach out to the communities. And through them, we were able to pass the message with regard to DV and protection and support available to them. The paralegals also help in formation of these online WhatsApp groups for awareness programs. They actually live very close to the women in the community, and women know whom to approach in time of crisis. And that was really a huge impact created. Momentum was created when everything was shut down. These women were able to access the community were able to talk to these peacemakers. So it helped the counselor to plan their sessions, to take their online counseling, to provide them the safety measures, how they can keep themselves safe. And one of the things that My Choices do is using technology very effectively. And we have a system of capturing data of our work. And when this physical access was not possible, we continued our work and used these applications and database to reach out to everyone whom we were working. So for us, it was not like, yes, we were not able to go in the field, but we were very much connected with the community, with all our prevention team, like school girls and boys, vulnerable adolescent girls and boys in the community, teachers, community leaders, clients. So we were able to give them this assurance that we are here, and we took this opportunity through these WhatsApp groups and online platforms to educate more on violence and abuse and how they can keep themselves safe, how they can support them. We took many such uh, online training sessions with our peace champions who are boys, and those boys were able to identify the gender gap, the gender-based discrimination, violence in their own home, in their own communities, and they were able to step in. That is really remarkable, since it has not impacted our work uh, with this virus. We were connected all the time with the field through our community paralegals and other prevention programs. Uh, we, we, we adopted another strategy through food and essential service drive. We were able to reach out the communities. Otherwise, it was difficult for women to pass the message. But when we partner with the many organizations who are in this field, who are doing this food and essential service drive, we pass the message to these women where our community paralegals were not there to seek help in case of emergency, and the helpline numbers and toll-free numbers.
Good.
So I would say that we were able to use our network, our grassroots network, to mobilize the resources and help for the women. There are many challenges to while dealing with these issues, but with our legal empowerment work, I must say we were able to make a difference in these critical times. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Farzana. Thank you very much. We can remain the conversation after the formal time, but now one of the things that I will give the word back to Abby, but one of the things that I would like to highlight in all of your speaks is that it's a crisis moment, very severe, with lots of risks to do this work. And one of the things that this research shows is that in several experiences, it's possible to think about this as a methodology for beyond COVID, you know, for rethinking about the justice sector as a whole. So we would go back with this question to you, but now I will pass the floor to Abby to introduce Liv Torres. Please, Abby.
All right. That was a truly illuminating and inspiring discussion. So I wanted to thank everyone who joined. Your invaluable perspectives really will inform strong policy recommendations for the future. So I recommend and encourage everyone who is on here to read the report that comes from the research that these groups are doing, as it will be very informative. So it is my honor now to introduce Liv Torres to offer some closing thoughts. She's the director of the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies, and in which this post and her many prior posts, she has dedicated her career to advancing peace, justice, equality, and inclusion. Liv, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. And let me start by, well, first, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I can see on the light that people are in different time zones here. Let me start by thanking the Legal Empowerment Network, Namati, our fellow organizers, for initiating this conversation, for all the great words and inspiring words that we've heard, for all of you attending this important discussion, and not the least, a big, big thank you for all the important work that is being done on the ground with justice, grassroots justice organizations taking the lead, women taking the lead. And wow, we've really been tested over the past year. We thought we had substantial challenges before the pandemic hit us. And then COVID came on top of this. And I must just start by saying how impressed I am about the innovation, the initiatives, the frontline workers with all the risk involved in the work that you are doing, all the initiatives. It seems like you and we are not stopped by anything, not even technical problems with platforms for this seminar. We have just turned around and come up with new solutions for conversations like this, for capacity building, for training, and for responding to the massive needs out there. So a big, big thank you for that initially. Now, we knew that the challenges were massive before the pandemic, as I said. I'm not going to repeat all the words that have been said during this conversation. I'd like to put sort of 3 big lines under them and reiterating the important words. But 1/3 of women before the pandemic was victims of violence, many of them struggling to get representation, get help, and being heard when they raised their issues. And then, of course, the pandemic came with additional challenges, lockdowns, additional violence problems, and there is no doubt that the justice gap has been increasing. We know all of that. We know that the challenges are immense. We know that many of our sisters are oppressed. We know that we are discriminated against. We know that the justice gap is enormous and that we need to address the justice gap in order to address the gender gap. We know that justice for women is core for building sustainable societies. We know that the challenges and the opposition is enormous, but we know that there are massive gains out there to be made. The roadmap for peaceful, just and inclusive societies was very clear. And similarly, other statements and conventions as well, that no country will be able to achieve just societies without closing the gender gap, without making sure that women have access to justice. So we know the gains. We know that societies that respect women's rights and close the gender gap and the justice gap do better. We know that this is the way to build sustainable societies. We know that women representation around tables when we negotiate peace agreements, etc., they do better, they live longer, those peace agreements. We know that women representation is good for corporate as well as societal and organizational development and performance. We also know, and I know that from hearing your voices today, that we have amazing resources. We need to organize better, mobilize harder, and support each other on the way forward. Because as Mary Robinson said initially, all crises are gender skewed. They are not gender neutral. So we have to mobilize accordingly to make sure that we are heard, we get equal rights, and we have representation around the table, and that justice is put at the core of development and recovery and resets. Now, let me wrap up with a few points. Again, saying how impressed I am about all the work that you are doing, how thankful I am that we were also part of launching the Grassroots Justice Fund that Mary Robinson mentioned, and reiterating again how important it is to address justice for women. That is the basis and the pillar on which basis we address the gender gap, but also societal development and resilient country building, nation building. That is the only way to go forward. Now, where I come from, I'm originally Norwegian. We are very proud of our first woman prime minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland, a fellow elder of Mary Robinson. She was prime minister in 3 rounds. She was also chairing the Brundtland Commission for Sustainable Development and leading the WHO for a while. She said as follows: woman power is a formidable force. So let us make it exactly that as we go forward. Thank you to everyone. Over to you again, Abigail.
Thank you so much, Liv. And we also have the valuable input coming from Florencia Sotelo. She's the National Director of Access to Justice in Cases of Gender-Based Violence in the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity of Argentina. Florencia, you may proceed.
Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes. Muchísimas gracias a las y los organizadores del evento por permitirnos participar.
Thank you for allowing me to participate in this event. I am the national head of the Access to Justice in the Ministry of for Women that was created last year in 2019, really. And they have the mission to create public policies that may strengthen the access to justice of those women that are in a violent situation. During many years, the Justice Administration has been questioned in all the world due to its inability to give a response to the situation. And it has been aggravated by the pandemic and the lockdown, as in many other countries, and the normal working for the assistance mechanisms. Access to justice, for example. We realize that this is a fundamental right, and we must have the right diagnosis of what are the worst obstacles for women to have access to justice. We have a definition of access to justice. The first dimension is about the access in itself, that is the fact of being able to make a petition. The second dimension has to do with receiving a good service at the justice, with an effective justice. And the third dimension is the one that we are working on, because we understand that this theoretically has been very left aside and has to do with strengthening the possibility of people to sustain a process when he wishes, without having to leave it aside due to the lack of economic resources. In Argentina, we have seen statistics that are available that show that there are many failures in the possibility of women to reach justice. The women cannot make a claim, and there are other women who do reach this point, but they have to abandon the process before it is concluded. And the reason for this has to do with the fact that the gender-based violence is a cultural phenomenon, and there is an inequality behind the gender-based violence, and they affect the rights of women are affected by this. And this is key in order to have a woman that can live free from violence. But together with all of this, and I believe that this has to do also with what we have talked in the panel, has to do with the need that the state may develop policies in order to make more accessible for women the to get work or to achieve a justice when she needs it. So this is key, really, to improve the life of women. We think that we have to have a community spirit, and also we have to give a emotional and sustainable support to women so that she can continue doing what she needs to do. And we have to have an approach that make this possible. And this is not only addressed to the access, but it has to be ready for the woman, ready for the women that need it at a certain point. They have to strengthen the organizations in the country and those authorities that know very well how the violent situation is in the country. So, and offering more resources so that this work may be developed. This following up has been very efficient in all places that has been carried out. They make it possible to create projects against violence, and it is less difficult to offer access to have an access to the state policies that sometimes are difficult to reach people. And this is also very important. We have seen that this follow-up is very positive in the legal procedures because offers a possibility of being heard, the possibility of being heard in a legal process. This is the heart, the core of the public policies that we are carrying out in Argentina and that we are teaching in Argentina to the young women. Because I think that it is in agreement with what I've heard here this morning. I am very glad, very happy to have heard the initiatives in the different countries and to see how we have a common base. All of us have a common base in order to achieve all what we really need in order to have better conditions to have a better future and improve the conditions in which women live. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Florencia. It is heartening to know that we have a common cause between government, civil society, and all stakeholders. For final closing thoughts, I give it back to Denise, who will ask our grassroots champions for some pearls of wisdom to leave with us today.
Exactly. So we are going back to our organization's leaders with one very personal question. If you have to choose one lesson, the main lesson that you learned during this year and in facing the risks and challenges that you face, to share with us, what would it be? What's the lesson you would like to share with us? And then I'm going around and request you to talk around 2 minutes or 3, no more than that, then we can finish on time. And I start with Yasminka again. So which is your lesson, Yasminka?
It's very hard. There are several lessons. It's not only one, except that the thing that I have said into the conclusions when I spoke previously. However, I have to say that I was first of all, when joining this initiative and now closing this initiative, let's say, what I have learned, and I was amazed about the experiences and of course how should I say, the efforts, the will and the persistence of the civil society organization to play the very well-known role, and that is to be a cornerstone of the provision of the services to women that have suffered gender-based violence. And practically, we as a civil society sector that is providing these services as as legal empowerment activists have stepped forward, have shown that we can adapt and that we can provide these women with the services that they need actually. So practically we found out the strength to adopt and to provide those services. Unfortunately, we cannot continue that for the state institutions and for the formal institutions. However, this shouldn't discourage us because we already, as Liv has said, we were facing that type of a situation. So practically now we have to, again, intensify our efforts and to, of course, ask the government and the officials to stand up and to practically find a new ways of cooperating and working together with us in order to provide an effective and appropriate service to the women that have suffered violence. My colleagues from Bulgaria, Albania, and Bosnia and Herzegovina that have participated in this initiative has shown practically that they can find strength, and they have worked on 3 levels: providing services to women, working with the state institutions in order to resolve their problems, but also have maintained their efforts on systematically changing and asking governments to adopt and practically comply with the standards that the state have undertaken, especially in Europe when we are speaking about the Istanbul Convention, but of course, the rest of the international documents. So practically, we have employed different types of a strategy, and I am assured that we can do that into the future for the sake of the women that have suffered gender-based violence.
Thanks, Edminka. Thank you very much, and thank for all your colleagues in Eastern Europe who participated in this survey and in this study. I hope we can continue in touch. So I'm going to Farzana. What about you in the big India? Which is your main lesson?
For me, it is, we always say that courage is contagious, and we have to have hope. And this whole pandemic and the way we adopted to these change situations, what Jasmika was saying is applies to us also, that we can adopt various strategies. There is nothing that we cannot do. And initially, when everything got shut down with this, lockdown, we were very, how we will be reaching these women. And then one after one, we started adopting the strategies, and those were very effective. And in fact, we always say in my choices right now that it's the worst and women are suffering so much, but this pandemic has taught us so many lessons that how we can come close, we can collaborate more, we can respond in a better way, we can strategize our prioritize and strategizes things to reach out to the women. And with that hope and courage, we can pass it to the communities, to the women, and as one unit we can respond. The other thing that that was the biggest lesson, that how strong the civil societies are, especially in India. We saw that the massive efforts done by the civil society organization, grassroots organizations, when the government, especially responding to gender-based violence, when the government was absolutely, struggling to with the virus and this maintaining this health crisis, the civil society organization, the grassroots organization really come very strong, and they created a parallel, with that massive, support and resources to rescue the women, to support them, the marginalized communities, the other sections who are suffering. So I think that the biggest lesson we learned that our civil society and grassroots organizations are really very strong, and they are capable of responding to any crisis. We just need to create that momentum. We need to create we need to draw the lessons and take it forward with the government and other people who are the key players to show them the way, because many a times government just wash their hands saying that this is massive, we cannot do. But with our experiences, with our grassroots initiatives, we can show them the way and they can adopt the strategies that we have taken. So for us, the biggest lesson is that we went beyond our capacities to support the women and to carry out this work. And the women who are suffering feel that they are not alone.
Thank you, Farzana, and thank you for our colleagues from Cambodia, Bangladesh, and the Philippines who also participated in this study, sometimes at 7 a.m. in their places, 7 p.m. in our part of the world. So, but we all made it possible. So I will ask then Lineta to talk about your main lesson from Uganda and also lessons from our colleagues in Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Denise. And so I'd say for for what we have learned as FIDA Uganda, but also what we learned from our other colleagues in South Africa and in Nigeria, is that working with existing community structures is indispensable. And it was a lifeline for organizations in sub-Saharan Africa during the pandemic time and during the crisis. If we were not able to use what was already there with all the limitations, we would have been lost and we would have been unable to respond to women facing violence. And for Uganda in particular, for FIDA Uganda, what we saw is, as a result of this collaboration between FIDA Uganda and community justice actors, the capacity of these actors was strengthened. And even beyond the lockdown period, they've handled a greater number of cases than in the past. And due to the time of crisis, much more reliance was placed on our community paralegals to come up with solutions for clients. And they were guided by FIDA lawyers, but the weight of the cases really lay with them. So even beyond the pandemic, FIDA Uganda will continue to train and engage community justice actors on an ongoing basis. And this will be done, and it's already done, by ensuring that in every activity that the organization carries out, and even in providing routine legal aid, community justice actors are invited to be present in the offices and to observe how the legal officers carry out their work. And these actors are also supported with mobile devices and airtime and means of transportation, and in order to help them to carry out their work effectively. So what we are essentially doing is, we're strengthening the culture of a community response to GBV, and we have truly found that this has strengthened our overall response and our overall ability to really benefit the women that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Lineta, and thank you again for our colleagues in Nigeria, South Africa, and Uganda. And then I go to Márcia. Márcia, querida, which is your main lesson?
Bom, eu vou eleger uma lição que eu acho que é importante.
I'm going to choose one lesson that I think that is important, taken from the analysis of what happened in Latin America, the 5 countries, Brazil, Argentina, Guatemala, Mexico. And there's something that calls our attention, a lesson that calls our attention. It's the totality of institutions and services, justice service, started to work through remote and virtual services. At the same time, all of us, we understood the difficulty to have internet access and difficulty to access new technology, be it because of lack of connectivity or because of the equipment and the digital knowledge of the women, especially the older women that live in the outskirts of the cities. We know that the possible answers continue excluding the most vulnerable women. So this is something that we need to face, because we believe that this situation will not be altered. Even after the pandemic, the services started working virtually, digitally, and the trend is that this will continue to be so. So if I bring a lesson to all of us, is that if we want to work with legal empowerment, there's an assumption that we should start to think of digital empowerment for these women. We have to demand from the government that the internet go to rural areas. The equipment has to be cheapened so that we may build processes for digital learning for these women. So if we wish from now on to build more efficient channels to access justice. So I think I would choose this requirement. And I believe that this is a challenge we should all face, and for the governments.
So before sending the word back to Abby to finish, I could not, I have to say that this study was only possible because of efforts of so many women who are in the pictures of our PowerPoint that you will receive. They are TEMI's staff, all people in TEMI's, administrative staff, the legal officers, NAMACH's staff, who has been following very close every step of this and also were able to support this work, but also a team of researchers composed by Andrea, Maíra, Isabel, Simone, and Daisy, who in 3 months were able to deliver a survey, doing interviews, prepare a case study, and also a regional report for each of the regions and initial findings. To Jade Alves, who is TEMI's research assistant here, who is a paralegal herself, and to particularly to all women paralegals working in the front line in a very risk situation, moved by compassion, empathy, and love. And I think this work and the need for reforming the justice systems is in honor to her, to them, the ones who are in need and the ones who are also in need, but provide support and friendship and solidarity. So this is a kind of appeal of many things that are happening in the world today, but I think through legal empowerment and the Legal Empowerment Network, we were able to get some of these experiences and provide evidence that it's not possible to think about the justice system without participation and innovation and sustainability for women who need this. So, Abby, this is with you to finish.
Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate that we at the Legal Empowerment Network, working closely with our anchor member Temis, Marcia, Denise, Jade, thank you. We remain committed to advancing gender equality and furthering the exploration of these issues. This participatory research project is just the beginning. We hope to engage more stakeholders in other learning and advocacy efforts in the future. So we will continue the conversation on our online discussion forum at the Legal Empowerment Network's website. The link will be provided to you in the chat box to the right. We invite all of you to join us. You can do so for free and easily. If you would like to receive the report and the research and other materials relating to today's session, please fill out the form that my colleagues are sharing via chat, and we will be happy to send our research and useful resources with you. I'd like to extend a special thank you to my colleagues Marta Almela and Luciana Berkovich, who work behind the scenes, but without whom this event would not have happened, or the research, or much anything else, honestly, and without whom we would not have overcome these technical issues. Thank you as well for our talented interpreters, Lucia, Silvia, Veronica, Elena, Eleonora, Alicia, and Milena. Today, in summary, we learned that in order to guarantee access to justice for women, they must be understood as change makers with a central role in devising solutions to their own problems. And those problems must be cooperatively addressed by all stakeholders, civil society, government, and more. It is not an easy path, but it is a necessary one, and one that grassroots justice groups around the world are committed to. We hope to continue seeing you as we all work together toward the greater goal of gender justice. Thank you all, and safe journey.